Okay, Justin. So JXP has practices. It
Yeah.
is a practice-oriented framework,
Right.
which following Jesus is practice-oriented, right?
Right.
So JXP has 5 core practices to each of the Gospels, and then 2 unique practices to each Gospel.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about the 5.
Okay.
Okay, first, Lectio Divina.
Yeah. So when you hear that word, like I remember the first time I heard it, you're like, what exactly did you just say? uh, but it's just a practice that's been around the church's life for a long time.
Mm,
Thus, even the name is dated. It just means sacred reading.
mm,
But I think what I love about Lectio is, and we've talked about this a lot, when I encounter the scriptures or when I approach them, Lectio invites me not to try to like master them
yeah,
or slice and dice them, but it invites the text or the living word
yeah.
to read me. It
Mm,
invites me into that experience
mm,
where I'm listening, I'm attentive, I notice, it engages my whole being, right?
mhm,
So
mhm.
I notice as I read a text what emerges
And you're reading it slowly,
very slowly.
3 times.
Yes.
Yeah.
What emerges from the text?
Mm,
What is it that Jesus is inviting me into through that experience? And then what am I going to do with it?
yeah.
And it's been really helpful.
Okay, the prayer of examine.
Yeah. I actually first encountered that prayer. A Jesus follower named Ignatius of Loyola. That's who we get that from.
Okay.
And I found that practice and his story helpful in a season of my life, honestly, where I kind of had come to the end of words with prayer.
Mm,
And it was given to me as such a gift because the way I began to practice it was end of the day, I'm not having to produce anything. I'm using this gift of a prayer that's already given. It
mm,
invites me to notice the light of the one who is complete light, undimmed
mm,
in any way, right?
mhm, mhm,
To welcome Christ, to lean into a place and posture of gratitude.
mhm,
And then when I've settled into that, then to just let my day kind of unfold. It's like
mhm,
Jesus and I are sitting there watching a movie together,
mhm,
start to finish. We're not judging it, we're noticing.
mhm,
But I am noticing along the way, when did I lean into the way of love, the way of Christ? And when did I lean back? When
mm,
was I afraid? When was I, and I would even say like things like anger, et cetera, probably come out of fear for me. So
mhm,
when was I withdrawing
mhm,
and how I treated my wife or how I encountered someone else or etc.
mm.
And I'm just noticing, I'm not judging. And then at the end of that, Jesus and I talk about what we saw.
Mm. It's
And
beautiful.
and honestly just end up with Jesus, I want to lean into love next time I encounter that.
And there's always tomorrow.
And there's always tomorrow. And matter of fact, for me, it's often been a prayer right at the end of the day where I'm like, well, good night.
Mm.
Let's do it again tomorrow.
As I've practiced that, it has brought that scripture, his mercies are new.
Every morning.
And I go, all right, tomorrow it's new. All right, Justin, let's talk about Sabbath,
Yeah.
which I have heard people say, well, I take time off throughout the day.
Yeah.
Sabbath is one of the core practices.
It is.
Talk about that.
It is. And it's core for us because it's core for God. Like I actually love that it's that practice God goes first in. So we read the creation account and God steps back and it just says like he just completely delighted in all he had made. He ceased from his creating, his working. He built the world to run. We don't have to hold it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an act of faith. It's an act of trust. It's an act of the love of God and living into that when we take a break. And I love how even like in the Exodus story, right?
Mm-hmm.
People were moving into a new reality. They were invited into that. And they were said, remember, we do this because this is what the world is actually built for. This is how the world was made. The text in Exodus goes back to creation.
It's one day with God,
Yeah.
intentionally. Yeah.
Yeah. What I love though is actually said again later in the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
In the Deuteronomy text. And the rationale there is remember you were slaves and now you're free. This was how free people live. So I point those things out because I think that gets at the quality of it.
Mm.
And then Jesus says stuff like this. The Sabbath was made for humans, not the other way around.
Mm.
And so we want to follow Jesus into that life of trusting God, of resting, of delighting in the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we take a break 24 hours a week. It's a gift. And I had a friend that gave me this concept of if you divided each day into 3 blocks, 3 8-hour blocks.
Yeah.
Did I do my math right?
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Morning, afternoon, and evening.
Mm-hmm.
What would be your 3 back-to-back-to-back blocks?
Mm.
And that's the question we asked in the practice, right?
That's right.
Because it makes room now, whether my work schedule is this or that. Maybe I have young children in the home. Maybe I'm in a different season of life. the Sabbath is for everybody,
Mm.
not just the privileged few.
One of the practices, the core practices, is called daily rhythm.
Daily rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah, which I would actually say is more important now than ever because of the era we live in. So talk
It
about daily
is.
rhythm a little bit.
It's been super helpful. And again, we would just be remiss to not say it. All these practices, we aren't the originators, right?
Mhm,
We
mhm.
are such a part of Great Cloud of Witnesses.
Mhm.
But that practice offers us things like, before I pick up my device that wants to stream all the things to me, before I go there, I want to actually notice what God has to say,
Mhm.
right? So I'm gonna scripture before phone.
Mm.
I'm gonna like put my phone away when I'm waiting instead of pulling it out and just like
No
being
phone while
occupied.
waiting.
No phone while waiting.
Yeah, I love it.
That is the hardest and the most life-giving one for me. I
That's right.
don't misunderstand. I love the scripture part, but I've noticed more in those waiting moments
Mhm,
as I've encountered people, the beauty of creation,
mhm,
stuff going on within that I think God's trying to communicate. The
mhm,
no phone while waiting. Yeah, yeah.
mm.
And it has a variety of other ways we do that, but that rhythm's been very helpful for me.
Mm. And one of the core practices is whether you call it community at table or
Okay.
communion or the
Yeah.
Eucharist or
The
the
Lord's
Lord's
Supper.
Supper. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this idea that Jesus is with you at every table.
Yeah.
And that's revolutionary. So talk
Yeah.
about that practice a little bit.
I love it. And we take our cues again from those gospels that are forming us.
Mhm.
And I love how we see it's literally on Jesus is like the darkest night of his life. What
Mm.
does he do? He doesn't run away. He doesn't isolate. He literally sets a table for his friends,
Mhm.
even his friends who are going to turn on him and
Mhm.
forget him and all kinds of other things. But he sets a table, and the various gospels talk about it different ways. But one of the gospels has this line, "Oh, how I've longed to share this meal with you."
Mm.
And then they all in various ways say, "Hey, every time you do this, I want you to remember."
Mm.
And I think we have enough evidence that he's not just saying, think about it. Oh, that's a nice idea.
Right.
Remember, re-enter in this moment.
Re-enter into.
And so now, like you said, every table reminds us, helps
Mhm.
us remember. When we do this, when we do what? When we eat, when we're at a table.
Mm.
The Lord has set a table. He
Yeah.
welcomes us. And then he says this, my broken body for your brokenness. Take and eat your fill. My blood poured out to put everything right between you, God, you and yourself, you and each other, you and the world. Take and drink. And so we approach our tables that way.
Mm.
And it is liberating, life-giving. I remember a friend of mine, he painter, house
Mhm.
painter,
Mhm.
wasn't so sure what he thought about church, had some rough times with it. He was in our JXP group. And we did this practice. And we came back the next week and we said, what was that like? And he said a couple things. One, he just talked about how if that's what God's like, I want that.
Hmm.
Two, he said, I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can do that practice. I eat all the time.
Right.
Like,
right.
and there's something about connecting that eating act
Yeah.
to God's hospitality and his
Wow.
inviting me into it that is just like everything I want.
Yeah.
So that's one of our practices.